All right, welcome to Back to the Roots podcast. This is Brian Wood and Mike Klein, and today we're sitting down with Dr. Paul Dettloff, who is a veterinarian and owner of Dr. Paul's Labs in Arcadia, Wisconsin. Dr. Paul, thanks for sitting down with us, and can you just start off with giving us your history and your growing up, what your background is, and what brought you eventually into organic agriculture?
Certainly, I'd be glad to. I was born in 1942 on a 120-acre flat blackland farm at Grand Meadow, Minnesota, which is about 12 miles from the Iowa border and about 12 miles from George A. Hormel Processing Plant in Austin, Minnesota. And I was born onto a diversified farm like all of the farms were in southern Minnesota, even though it was black prairie, deep 4 or 5 feet of black soil, heavy CEC. We had 12, 13 cows. We milked by hand. I started milking my first roan cow in 1948 by hand. We had a little hog house that some extension guy wrote up the plans for that everybody built, and there was an alley down the middle and pens on the side, and we farrowed about 6 sows twice a year, and we bought feeder pigs. My mother had a chicken coop where we had white leghorn chickens that ran all over the yard, and a big garden. I was probably raised on a paleo diet and didn't know what it was back then, and I was probably organic before I could spell it. We had brucellosis eradication program, and this big roan cow that I milked by hand, she was probably 10 or 12 years old, came up as a Bangs positive. So she had to go through slaughter. And that was a sad day for me. We did get milking machines, 2 McCormick Deering milking machines in the early 50s, so we didn't hand milk anymore. We never did sell bulk milk with a bulk tank. We sold cream, which means that we had a separator. Our first separator was a DeLaval 17 hand crank. I had an older brother that was bigger than me, and he could hand crank that to where the bell wouldn't ring. They had a stupid bell on there, and when you got it up to the RPMs that you could run this whole milk through and separate the cream from the skim milk, the bell would quit ringing. And he left for the Navy in 1955, and I was just able to crank that, but boy, it was hard to get that up. I just didn't have enough strength to not ring that stupid bell. And my dad came home with an auction with a red McCormick Deering with a switch on it with a motor, so I didn't have to ever conquer that silly bell. Skim milk got fed to our feeder pigs. We had wooden troughs, 2x8 boards, and they were about 16 feet long, and when you got these 35, 45-pound feeder pigs and you dumped 10 gallons of skim milk into this trough, it was absolute pandemonium. Those pigs just loved it. Mm-hmm. Our diet for pigs back then was cob corn, and skim milk. Once in a while, Dad would bring home a bag of tankage. Tankage is animal byproducts that were processed and fed back to the pigs for a source of protein. And every once in a while, he'd bring home a bag of bone meal. And our pigs never got sick. They all got worms, and we had, in a brown gallon jug, piperazine wormer. And man, they would spit out these big roundworms, and that was our whole program for pigs.
So you can fatten pigs with skim milk?
Oh man, they thrive on it.
Oh, they do.
They'll drink until their bellies just get round. Mm-hmm. And pigs are smart. Pigs are smart, and we would buy feeder pigs from some neighbors. And this is kind of where I probably was gravitating towards a veterinarian that didn't know it. When I was like 8 or 9 years old, and you'd feed this skim milk, there'd always seem to be a pig that was a little bit smaller, maybe a Shire pig, and he would kind of come up and, don't laugh at me, but I'd start talking to him. And I'd say, well, hi, pig, how are you today? And by golly, the next day I'd be pouring that in, this little pig would kind of wander up and he'd say hello to me. And my dad became aware of it, and that you got that little red pig as your friend, and pigs are intelligent, and I've learned from that down life's highway that animals can pick up intent. Mm-hmm. It's a frequency thing. If you tell a cow, I can help you, you don't even have to say it to her. You think it into her subliminally. It's all frequencies. And it all started when I was a little farm boy talking to a pig. And when Dad would sell that pig, I'd miss him. And I was kind of put out about it. Dad, you sold my favorite pig. Well, he weighed 240 pounds, son, And my mother had chickens. The chicken egg truck came every Thursday. And that brought, I went to a one-room country school a mile away. And we had bib overalls. And 2 pair of bib overalls in the fall came from the chickens, the eggs, and new pair of shoes. And I wore my shoes out too quick. Mother always got mad at my ruining my shoes. And now when it gets 25, 30 below at Arcadia, Wisconsin, they close the school. Back then, Mother put a wool scarf over your face and tightened it up and said, walk fast. And that's how the world has changed. And so we had a diversified farm. We had pasture. We had oats as a cover crop, and there was no alfalfa grown then. We grew Elsack clover, brome grass, and timothy. And we'd keep that 3-4 years. We made hay with a sickle mower, and we put up loose hay into our barn with a grapple fork and a rope going through, and Grandpa had his perch and horses that he would pull the rope up, and that's how we mowed long stem dry hay. We fed our cows. We had a little 12 by 40 silo, and they each got about 2 pounds of corn silage a day. And we had a green hammer mill that we ground ear corn and oats for our cows, cob corn, ear corn. And we had a Hills coffee can that was a 1 pound coffee can with the rim turned over, and you sprinkled enough of that ground feed on that silage just to make it white. Oh, don't give her too much because she's not milking very much. Give this one over here more. We challenged feed and didn't know what that was. And so, that was our farming operation. Dad had a sideline that's kind of interesting in that there was a Hormel buying station 4 miles away from us that would it was a gathering point for pigs to go to Austin, Minnesota to be butchered. And boar pigs were a dog on the market. Nobody wanted boars. And they would process them and buy them at South St. Paul, which was like 70 miles away. And so my dad had a deal with the Hormel buyer that all of the boar pigs that came in to Racine, Minnesota, came to our farm. So on Saturday, we'd have about 8 big old 500-pound boars with tusks on them 3 inches long because nobody cut the needle teeth out back then. And my dad would bring them home, and he would put 2 double half hitches around them, take a rope and go on the inside leg. We'd have them with a hog holder. My brother would have them by the snout with a hog holder. And my dad would put the rope, and he'd pull that rope, and he'd flip that 500-pound pig bloop, right on its side. And then my brother or I would hold that rope, and Dad would castrate him. You won't believe this, but his castrating tools were a razor blade and a potato, Lysol, and Dixie pine tar. Everybody in southern Minnesota used Dixie pine tar. And it's still on the shelf today. It's a yellow can, and he would take and he'd slit that scrotum open, pull out the testes, cut it off. First he would scrub the scrotum with Lysol water, and then these big old cuts, you would just drench that full of Dixie pine tar. And they never got infected. They never got infected. And in about 3 weeks, they're all healed up. It'd kind of get a cauliflower on it, that scab, and it'd just disappear. And then we'd haul them in our big old Ford flatbed truck up to South St. Paul. 3 o'clock in the morning, you could get up there by 5:30 and get ready for the kill that day. And you'd make maybe $8 a pig. and we could cram 18 of them in that truck. And what was really fun was to go to South St. Paul on Wednesday with Dad and skip school, and that was communing. That was communing with your dad in these truckload of pigs. I mean, that was part of being a farm boy, you know. So, graduated from Grand Meadow High School, and a little class of 43 students. We were a football dynasty. I played football. And in 1957, the Russians sent up a dog. And first time we'd been out of our atmosphere, and this satellite was called Sputnik. And this dog went around the world a few times and got sick of it, and he plopped in the ocean. And Russia was ahead of us in the space. Oh, man. Russia was ahead of us.
Can't let that happen.
We need engineers. We need chemical engineers. We need civil engineers. We need chemists. We need them all. And so, boy, the push was on. We got to catch up with Russia. The Cold War post-World War II was at its height. So I had no clue what I wanted to do. The furthest I'd been away from home was our football team got to go up to watch the Minnesota Gophers in Minneapolis, and that was 75 miles away, and that's as far as I'd been when I was 18 years old. And I packed everything into a leather suitcase of my grandfather's, all my possessions, my 3 shirts and 3 pair of underpants and 3 pair of pants, and I went to Mankato State, and I was going to be an engineer. Didn't have a clue what.
Where is it Mankato State?
Mankato State, which is now Minnesota State.
Oh, okay.
Which is a college 90 miles out of, it's in southwestern Minnesota. Good school. And I started in pre-engineering. And went there a year, transferred to the University of Minnesota because I got a job that summer after my freshman year of college working for the maintenance department on St. Paul campus. And I spent my summer doing grunt work and cleanup work behind all the tradesmen in the veterinary school after my first year of college at the University of Minnesota, where I was working. And I wandered into the admissions in the vet school. We had a veterinarian in our hometown that was a pillar of the community, a young, very dynamic fella that I admired. And I went in and said, what do I need to get into vet school? Well, my engineering didn't apply to a lot of it, no chemistry. So I transferred and went through veterinary school. When I graduated from veterinary school, I had no debt. Back then, there were no scholarships. There was no funding. There's no Pell Grants. And what happened, there was 49 of us in class, and if you were 2 or 3 years into vet school and you ran out of money, you quit school and worked for a year. You just took a year off. And that's the way it was back then. And everybody in my class had a job. You worked on Saturdays and Sundays. You did stuff in the summer. And every year we'd lose 2 or 3 students and pick up 2 or 3 from the class ahead of us. And so I got out of vet school and had no debt and went into practice at Arcadia, Wisconsin, which is, excuse me, in the western part of Wisconsin. The last Wisconsin glacier of 15, 20, 30,000 years ago did not glaciate this area, and it's very hilly, and it was called the driftless area. Consequently, Paleo-man was in there, and when I was a boy in southern Minnesota, my mother was raised on a farm along the Root River that had an Indian encampment on it, and we would go there and hunt Indian artifacts. And in high school, I started hunting Indian artifacts on where the Native Americans had camped. And when I got to Arcadia, Wisconsin, we had the old Paleo Indian that was pre-12,000 years ago, was in there early because it was not glaciated. And so that was really fun of being practiced. I'd be treating a milk fever for old Henry Ziegler, and I'd say, Henry, you ever find any arrowheads here? Yeah, down along the creek on that sandy knob, and that would be a campsite. And so my boys and I would do a lot of artifact hunting, and we got to be into the geology and the earth and that. And consequently, one son's a geologist and one son's an archaeologist now.
So, but just one step back, did you start your own practice directly out of vet school?
Yes, I did.
So you didn't go work for any other vet?
No.
You just started?
Back then, Minnesota was known as a leader in bovines. We had a Dr. Zimyanis that came out of Germany pre-World War II to get out of there. And he was our obstetrician, and he wrote the book on, he was the one that said there's 4 positive signs of pregnancy. And it was hands-on. We were on cows all the time. And our training in the bovine world was superb. By the time I graduated from veterinary school, I had palpated probably 2,500 cows.
Oh, wow.
And I could pick up a fetal membrane slip with my left hand on a 31-day pregnancy on a heifer. That's one of the 4 positive signs of pregnancy, and we were really trained. Now, it's hard to do because everything is computer and PowerPoints, and these young students don't get to see cow side manners. And I felt capable enough that I could handle it. And of our 49 students, there was 48 guys and 1 gal. There's probably 20 of them that went out on their own. I found a practice in western Wisconsin from an older veterinarian that didn't have the training we had. He didn't know how to do DA surgeries. He was not a good palpator. And he was in his autumn and tailed down. And back then, in 1967, when I graduated, the assessors would count the female cattle on every farm. And this was published by the state of Wisconsin. And so I got a hold of this book. And Arcadia is sitting on the edge of Trempealeau and Buffalo counties, 2 of the western counties. And these 2 counties were loaded with cows. And there was an older veterinarian 30 miles north, a Dr. Simpson, that was aged. There was an older veterinarian south of me and an older veterinarian east of me, and there was one young guy that was working 20 hours a day, couldn't keep up. And so I saw the opportunity with the cow numbers. And so I bought out his house and practiced lock, stock, and barrel. And I had a classmate, and we were looking to buy a clinic and could not find what we wanted. He took a job at another 3-man clinic for a year. And by the time it got to be January, I was turning work down. I mean, it was just there. And I brought the new skills from post-World War II veterinary training to rural Arcadia. And at the end of around February, I talked to my classmate and I said, hey, I'll sell you half of my accounts and half in this, and let's build a clinic. And that was the start of a 4-man clinic. And the best partner I ever had. I left practice after 11 years on a number of reasons. I had lost a wife in a car accident, and I had lost a son from leukemia. And I quit practice to get refocused, and I spent a couple years out of practice. And I worked for an integrated poultry operation. I learned a lot about poultry there. Then I went back into practice. I remarried. And I had 2 children by my first wife and 4 children by my second wife. And the boy from my first wife died of leukemia when he was 7. And so you look forward and say this too will pass and continue on. And so I practiced alone, and I was going to do that the rest of my life. In 1988, I saw my first cow that I was asked to treat her organically. I had one farmer west of town that was the best farmer in my whole practice. This guy, his philosophy is little things don't mean much, little things mean everything. I walk in his barn one day in July, and he's dusting his fan blades on his fan. And I said, what are you doing? Well, he said, I'm removing the dust from my fan blades. Oh, why are you doing that? Well, he said a clean blade will move more CFMs. Oh, you're probably right.
Something I never thought about. But
no, I hadn't either. This guy had. And I hardly did any vet work there. He had his soils in line. He'd been listening to the Elbrecht theory. And practiced it on his home farm. And he was already organic and didn't have to do anything. And I go there on a July day when it's really warm, 90-some% humidity. probably 90%, 90 degrees. And as I go in the barn, I would have a statement that I used a lot, and that I'd say, "Hi, Mike, what's new?" And I said to this farmer, "Hey, what's new?" And being in the community for 25 years, you know whose check was good and whose wife was bad. You know, that's you get to know the whole community, you know. Anyway, he said, "I think I'm going to go organic, Doc." And I said, "Okay, fine." I heard him, but didn't. I listened to him, but didn't hear him. I went down, and here's this beautiful white cow, registered Holstein. And this guy didn't lose any calves. And what he'd do is about every 3 years, he'd have an auction of his extra cattle, and he'd bring them in, and he'd have 2 cows. Here's a cow that's 6 years old that's milking 18,000 pounds, and here's a heifer that's calved last year, and she milked 16, and you're going to bid, and you're going to take whichever one you wanted. And so he would put 80 cows on the auction block and sell 40. And highly successful at this.
Oh,
so,
no, I had never heard of that before.
It's,
you give them choice, but you don't sell the other one.
No. Here's my 2 cows. Take your choice. You take one, and I'm going to keep the other and milk her. Now, that means you got a little confidence in both of them.
No kidding.
Isn't that a neat marketing tool? Mm-hmm. So anyway, I look at this cow, and you learn after a little while. And I had a lot of interns that came through and practiced for 3 months with me from Auburn and from Washington State and that. And I'd always say, "Guys, I want you to learn how to put a driveway dollar on that cow, to know what you're dealing with. This is economics, not sentiment." And so I would quiz these guys and say, what's your value for that cow? And they wouldn't have a clue, these young veterinary students. And I said, "Okay, she's going to milk 15,000 pounds. And he's going to get $6 a hundred, okay? And so she's going to bring in $900, and she's going to have 4 lactations and 4 calves, and you're dealing with this amount of money." So you know there's 3 kinds of cows. There's milk cows, there's meat cows, and there's mink. And that's, you figure, well, this is a milk cow, or this is a market cow. She's got a bad mastitis, and she's going to go, or this cow's going to die. We got to keep her from the mink ranch. And so that was, my job was to teach these veterinary students the philosophy. They knew all about the drugs and the treatment, but it was the wisdom of dealing with things. Anyway, this cow I liked. And you have to be a good observer to be a good veterinarian. And when I set my grip down, I could feel her heartbeat. I mean, her heartbeat was 100 beats per minute. And when you get a heartbeat that's 100 beats per minute rather than 60, it isn't pitter, patter, pitter. It's kathunka, 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 kathunka. And when I set my grip down behind her, I could just pick that up. And I thought, anything with 100 heartbeats that strong, half of them are going to be dead in 48 hours. That's experience. So I started getting a history. 107 temperature. Had twins. Huge placenta hanging there. Stepped on her right front teat. Somebody did, or she did. Her right front quarter was as hard as a brick wall, and I could get 3 little squirts of red serum. She wanted to die. I mean, heart rate, everything was like, woo. I backed up and I said, "Hey, man, we got one sick puppy here." I said, "I got to throw the kitchen sink at her." And he said, "Do you know what organic is?" And I said, "I think it's ORGAN. It's is that a C or a K at the end?" That's how far I was into organics in 1988. I was Joe conventional. Well, he said, "You can't use antibiotics." Whoa, I can't. You can't use antihistamines to counteract the poisons in the blood. That's illegal now. You can't use dipyrone to bring the temperature down. That's illegal now. You can't use anything in the uterus, for the tetracyclines. I said, "What in the world can I give your cow? My tool chest is empty." You can give her fluids and energy. Okay, I said, "I got a bottle of glucose and I got some lactated ringers." Okay, I said, "Well, why don't you just look the other way and let me stick a tetracycline pill in her uterus? What are you going to do with this uterus?" He was ahead of me. He was into homeopathy. This farmer was way ahead of Dettloff in 1988 because he went back and he was reading folklore medicine. He was learning what the gypsies were doing. He was reading a book from Europe. This guy was way ahead of the curve. I gave her fluids and went home with my tail between my legs. He was a consultant for a soils company on the Elbrecht system, and I came home to my wife and I said, Joan, we're going to have a problem because he's dealing with 5 or 6 of our accounts out there, and I don't have any tools for him. Fortunately, I married a German, and you know what my wife told me? Why don't you learn something? Why don't you learn something? That started my quest on reading. I've always been a reader, and I started scientific validation of aloe vera. Aloe vera does 15 things. It heals cutaneous tissue. What's inside of a uterus? Cutaneous tissue. It's anti-inflammatory. It depresses cortisol on stress. When I read the aloe vera book, it's like, woo, this we need for veterinary medicine in the organic world. Plus it was in a group of drugs that the FDA had looked at, and it's called the GRAS group, GRAS. That means generally regarded as safe, so the FDA doesn't control it. They do not want you putting it in the uterus, but I don't know that they can stop you because it's GRAS. The FDA has taken the stance that if it's not a FDA-approved drug, you can't use it in livestock. And that paradigm has to change, and it is really... I just got done with 3 days in the University at Minnesota at their veterinary convention, and the word is we're backing off antibiotics. You don't use them unless you have to. You only use them on select animals. Antibiotics has almost become a 4-letter word in veterinary medicine. And there is so much resistance. These organisms have all mutated. The antibiotics aren't working. That mousetrap's over. We're going to be forced, whether the FDA wants to or not, down life's highway to look at natural products nobody can mutate to because they have the frequency of life. Anything synthesized in a test tube in lab does not have the frequency of life, and organisms can mutate. They change their DNA. And so that was very interesting. So anyway, I started reading, and I started getting my little toolkit. And pretty soon, a guy in the neighboring practice is going to go organic, and the vet would say there, I don't even know. Call Dettloff. He's into that stuff. And at first it was kind of, when I went to the convention, I sat in the back of the room, and there's Dettloff. You know, and when you do something really different, there's, Gary Zimmer taught me this paradigm. When you jump out of the box, first thing to do is laugh at you. And I had guys, neighboring vets say, Dettloff's sticking some plant juice in this cow's uterus. What's he going to do next? And aloe vera works in the uterus. And then there's a herb called blue cohosh, known by the Native Americans as squaw root. What's in squaw root? It grows in the Appalachians in the woods. And it's called blue cohosh. It's called calophyllum. And the Native Americans knew that if you chewed this root, you got mega estrogens. And so if you're a little Native American maiden having birthing trouble down by the creek, and the old lady with the gray pouch with the roots would come and say, honey, chew this root and swallow the juice. And they would absorb huge doses of natural estrogen, which would give the cervix to dilate and the uterus tone. What do you want to happen with the retained placenta in it? You want the uterus to stay open and tone to push that out. It's a natural for retained placentas or a pussy uterus. And so that was Native Americans that brought in. Calophyllum is one of the most impressive herbs I've ever dealt with. I could not get mummies out of the cow's uterus for 30 years until I started using calophyllum 6 days in a row in the vulva, and I could get 80% of the mummies out of the uterus. I couldn't do it with any drug, ever. So That's personal observation tells me. I don't need to know the data behind Caulophyllum. I know it works. It just, you have to be a good observer. So anyway, all of a sudden, Organic Valley was very strong in my area, and they started calling me because they had farmers in their early infancy that were afraid to go on the organic truck. And the number one fear back in the early 90s was, what are we going to do without dry cow mastitis tubes? That was the fear. In 1972, when Novobiocin came out, new antibiotic, they said, we're going to save this for the udder. And Upjohn made a tube called BioDry, and they wanted everybody in America to put BioDry in every quarter of every dry cow, and we'll get rid of mastitis. I had a 4-man vet clinic, and Upjohn came in and said, we're going to sell dry cow tubes. How many farmers in your practice? And we said, well, probably 250. Call them in, we'll pay for a meal, and we're going to sell. How did we sell mastitis tubes? By fear and intimidation. I saw it happen, and it turned me off. We invited all our clients in for an evening meal. Upjohn got up. We had one farmer right on the edge of Arcadia that was one of our better farmers, a real quiet guy that was very, very bashful. He's the kind of guy that didn't want to look at you, and he came in very last guy, nice herd of cows, and there was one chair left right up in front, and he came up and sat in that and blushed red, so timid. And don't you suppose Upjohn started quizzing him? And they said, sir, how many cows you got? And he said, 30. He said, how many teats on your cows? And he said, 4. Well, he said, that's 120 teats. That's 10 boxes of, have you bought our new tubes? No. You haven't. How many kids you got? 3. He said, well, don't you care about your family? And this guy could have crawled under the table. He was so embarrassed. And I thought, why are you doing this to Alfred? Why are you doing to this client? Fear and intimidation. It's like, if you don't, staff's going to get you. Staff's going to get you if you don't use our tube. That's how
they're saying that would control staff.
Oh, they was going to clean up everything. There was no resistance to anything then. Staph was just another bug. We hadn't created any super bugs. Prior to 72, I practiced 5 years. I never saw a mastitis so severe that it killed a cow. We did not have those hemolytic E. coli's or these cows with 107 temperature. You know how mastitis was handled my first 5 years of practice? Combiotic. 100 cc bottle from Charles Pfizer in a brown glass bottle. 10 cc's of Combiotic in the muscle. Killed everything when it first came out. No withholding for slaughter. No withholding for milk. Foot rot, 10 cc's of Combiotic. Oh, I had a mastitis the other day, doc. And I'd say, oh, what happened? Oh, I gave her Combiotic. Cleared her right up. There was no somatic cell count. If you could get it to go through a strainer pad, you sold it. Mm-hmm. And you fed the cats the strainer pad.
And you actually would knock against the side of the strainer when it wouldn't all quite go through.
No, you go boom, boom, boom. I did that in the 1950s in the boy in Minnesota. I learned. And I saw all these old Polish Germans, we only got one cow left. We can't change strainer pads. Let's pound it through. When the government said you can't sell milk over 1 million cell count, boy, you ought to hear the old farmers complain. They're trying to tell me how to farm. Then they lowered it to 750. Then when the organic world came out, they said 400. It was the best thing they ever did. Mm-hmm. You pay according to somatic. You put the carrot out with money on at the end of it. No, and so, but anyway, we sold mastitis tubes. I go to Holland 2 years ago. Jim Wiederberg sends me to Holland because they use antibiotics in the European world, and they can't put their dairy products on the world market because they triple withholding time. That's the European organics. And they wanted to get on our paradigm, and they said, how do you do that? And so Jim said, we'll send Dettloff over, and you take care of him while we're there. And so my first meeting, my second meeting, my third meeting, I would pose the question, okay, what's your guy's biggest fear here in Holland? This is in 2016. Fast forward 40-some years, or 30-some years. What are we going to do when we lose our dry cow mastitis tubes? Oh, I said, I know what's going to happen. What? I said, absolutely nothing. And you're going to tell me in 4 years you just wasted $2,000 a year when you quit because nothing happened. It doesn't happen.
But the dry tubes is actually still stuff that still comes up in a farmer that wants to transition. A lot of them are still married to the dry tubes, and they just, it's the fear of the unknown.
Yes.
By not, they've done it for so long, they don't dare do without. So, is there any organic dry tube out there?
No. The organics is not big in sticking anything in the oven.
Yeah.
Our paradigm in the organic sustainable world is to help the immune system. Mm-hmm. Help the immune system. And we've got a whole plethora of treatments now. When the organics started in 88, we had very limited tools. And it's been a huge learning curve. It's been a huge benefit for agriculture, where we've gone back and we didn't invent the wheel. We just rediscovered what was out there, and we've tweaked it and we've combined it. We've learned so much in the last 15 years, all companies. Mm-hmm. Whether it's Dr. Paul's lab, Crystal Creek, Jerry Burnetti's lab, everybody has got products now that are far superior to 15 years ago, and we're coming up with new remedies every day.
Yeah, I remember being organic in the late 90s, where there simply was hardly anything out there. We used something, it was a natural, I don't even remember what it was called for a cow. You put it in up the teat for mastitis.
Yes.
It was purple, so we just called it purple cow, and I don't know what it was, and that would work great like one time. And then it wouldn't, the second time around for a cow, it wouldn't work. But to see what was available then when I was still milking at home, to see where we are today, I mean, there are legitimate tools available now for your herd of cows.
Yes.
And I realize there's a lot of tools, like you said, to build the immune system. But there's also tools to help you if you have a problem.
Yes.
So you're trying to head the problem off by prevention. But there's stuff available when it does happen, which is exciting.
Yes, and new things are coming out all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I just developed a new sugar pill with an organic sugar with a huge dose of water-soluble B vitamins the company came out with. B vitamins had to always be injected, B complex, and that stimulates appetite. And the sustainable world does not like to give a lot of shots. That really upsets the cow, and they would rather drench or give a pill. And so, and we're going to grass-fed milk, which means we're going to run short of energy if your soil is in good shape. You'll be protein-rich in the spring when you turn these cows out on this 28% grass. You're short on fiber, and you need energy. And we've learned to plug in apple cider vinegar and molasses, or 20 pounds of corn silage for fiber and energy. Or if you get a ketosis cow, I've got this new Keto Care pill, and it's loaded with sugar and B vitamins. That's just new on the market. These companies are all coming out with new things all of a sudden. In the worming, we had no good tools for worming 10 years ago. Now there's a plethora of them. We've learned about neem bark, the tree in India and in the tropics, where no insects will feed on neem. Neem is a fantastic wormer.
So now we talked earlier today with another guy about wormer in cattle, that I was told there's some wormer that will kill dung beetles as it passes through the cow. Is that so?
Not from the organic world.
No, I'm saying the conventional wormers.
Oh, Ivomec.
Ivomec will?
Ivomec. I just got done with 3 days at Rochester, Minnesota at the Minnesota Conference, and I had a whole day on parasitology. Ivomec, if you've used it in the last few years, 3 times or more, the parasites have mutated to where it's only 20% effective. Fenbendazole, that is approved for lungworms, except you got to dump the milk 90 days, is down in the 40% effective anymore. These synthesized wormers, their era is over.
Okay. And the organic ones,
or there's no resistance to organic because they're not synthesized in a lab. They're not a chemical. They're a natural. Neem bark, black walnut hulls, they're tannins. They're natural products, and there cannot be resistance. And very, very interesting. I spent a whole day on parasitology and parasites. There's a new one that I'm onto that I'm going to be looking at. There's a plant called Lespedeza. Lespedeza is a tremendous wormer. I'm looking at putting Lespedeza and neem bark into a pellet that you can feed naturally to a cow and wormer. I'll know in a year if I'm going to have it developed. But right now, lungworms has really hit the dairy industry because we've had the climate change with the wet weather. The emphasis is more grass, less corn silage, less acidotic. I mean, we're learning how to feed the rumen in the sustainable world, and the rumen's made for grass, end of conversation. And if you don't have good soils, you struggle. You struggle with your energy in that, and we graze too short. A parasite larva, it's been shown scientifically, it needs to swim up a dew-laden stem of grass, and it can only go 3 inches normally before it dries out from the dew and desiccates and it's over. You never want to graze below 4 inches. And if you want to prevent lungworms or parasites, don't graze when the dew is on. Keep your cows in the barn till 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock and don't go above 3 inches. We have been bombarded with lungworms. I treated over the phone for my organic clients that I deal with, probably 40 cases in the last 8 months.
And there's an organic treatment that works for lungworms?
Fenbendazole, and that doesn't work very well. The organic treatment is a pill that is neem bark, black walnut hulls, and mullein leaf. Mullein leaf is an expectorant that speeds up the modal cilia of your trachea to bring up the fluid. See, these lungworms get into the trachea, the bronchi, and they don't live in the lung parenchyma. They live in the air passages. They migrate. It's a 2-week migration through the lung tissue to get into the lung passages where they develop. And it's these larvae that are migrating through the lung parenchyma, for the lung tissue, for 2 weeks that gives them the cigarette cough.
I know, it's got the rattly,
Yep.
Like they've got an itchy throat.
They get up and they cough, just a dry cough. They don't run much of a temperature. Most of your conventional veterinarians that deal with locked up cattle don't see any cattle on pasture, and they're all missing it because it hardly runs a temperature. And they've had this cough for a week, and this week it's worse. And if they let it go at about the third to the fourth week, these lungworms start proliferating and filling up, and that animal all of a sudden is fighting, and when she tips her head back and breathes for air, she's dead. She's dead. You can't save them. And there's so much. And the lungworm does not live in the intestine. The lungworm lays its eggs in the bronchi, and the animal coughs up, and a lot of it drools out of her mouth. There'll be a lot of drooling, a lot of tongue out, salivating, but they will swallow some of that, and then that egg goes down, and that egg doesn't wait to get the ground to turn into a larva. The egg from a lungworm develops in the cow's intestines in the 2 or 3 days it's going through the intestinal tract, and when that egg hits the ground, it's a larva. And it goes through L1, L2, L3. It needs 70% moisture in a cow patty. If you have chickens out there that scratch this cow patty around and it gets warm and dries out, it's over. That's why if you got lungworms, drag those cow patties if you don't have chickens. let it dry out and desiccate.
Will dung beetles help that as well? They'll help it dry out
dung
fast
beetles drill little holes in there. Yes.
Dry it out in a day or two.
If you want to see dung beetles, you go to Holland.
Oh, really?
There's 3 kinds of dung beetles. And I was in 7 pastures in Holland, and these guys were all checking. I got a picture, it'll probably be in my new book, of a cow patty, 48 hours old, and there's at least 150 holes in it. And that's a roller. There's rollers and tumblers that bury, and these guys in Holland know their dung beetles like, it's unbelievable. So, but Ivomec, 50% of the Ivomec was found goes right out the gut. And where they came onto this is in the mountains in the BLM land. We've got property in Colorado in the mountains, and this is very fragile, sandy soil, very low organic matter. It's pretty much sand, and they run these beef cattle in the BLM land, and they see them once every 3 weeks. Before they put them out there, they give them Ivomec. And half of that comes through the cow when she gets up. They'll Ivomec them and take them out. This cryptobiotic soil is soil that starts getting fungi and bacteria, and it's starting to make organic matter and rebuilding the soil. And if you step on it, you ruin that crypto. You aren't supposed to go four-wheeling other than on the trails. Well, they noticed that around these cow patties from these girls, after they laid there a summer, all of a sudden there's a big circle about 2 feet where there's nothing growing. And they thought, what is killing all the vegetation around this cow patty? And here 50% of the Ivomec that you give a cow comes out in her manure.
And that was killing everything in the soil.
In the cryptobiotic soil, it's killing all the fungi, it's killing all the bacteria, the microbe, the whole ball of wax. It just sterilized it. And that was what tipped the people started lurking. What's in this cow manure? And it's Ivomec. Ivomec, if you turn your cattle out in the conventional herd, see the paradigm in the conventional world, and I get these calls all the time, where this guy has been organic for 6 years, and he goes and has coffee, or he goes to a meeting, and the conventional guys say, what kind of wormer you use? Well, I haven't wormed. How long you been organic? Oh, I've been on the truck 8 years. And you have never wormed? I worm every 6 months. The conventional paradigm are brainwashed to worm their cows.
And dry
and so
tube.
Then they call me and they say, I've had a meeting and I haven't wormed for 8 years. And I say, well, how do your cows look? Oh, I don't know, they look good. I said, do they shed their hair out good in the spring? Yeah. I said, you don't have any cows with big brown patches of straw-like hair in the spring? No. What's your somatic cell count? Well, it's 120. And you have any loose stools? No. I said, have you been on Kelp? Personal observation talking again. Cattle that are on Kelp for 18 months or 2 pasture seasons or close to 2 years will have a buildup of iodine in their body. Dr. Richard Ulrey in Michigan and I did a pilot study where we took 2 herds in Wisconsin that had never seen kelp and 2 herds that had never not had kelp from day one. He did the same thing in Michigan, and we drew hair samples on the pole and sent them in to his lab in Chicago. Dr. Paul's paid for this. The iodine level in the hair of these animals that have been on kelp all their life was 3,000 times higher. It was off the chart. If you look at a periodic table, iodine has 53 electrons, and anything that lines up vertically has the same valence or the same action. And who's the cousins of iodine? Fluorine, chlorine, bromine, poisons. Why iodine ever came into our thyroid gland as to control goiter for basic metabolism is a misnomer. When you fill a cow up with iodine, parasites don't like it. I've had many people tell me, you told me to feed kelp to my cows, and since I've done that, the flies don't want to land on my cows. They want to land on me.
Now, does it work feeding small calves kelp?
Yes.
Just free choice kelp?
From day one. 2 things I want every sustainable farmer to feed, free choice, is humates and kelp.
So if iodine is considered, well, if iodine's in kelp and iodine is in the same category as other poisons, and things don't want to, it's keeping flies away and it's keeping worms away.
Yes.
Then what is, I guess the question would be, what is the benefit of iodine? It sounds like you don't want iodine, so what is the benefit of iodine?
Oh, the benefit of iodine is it's a trace element used in the immune system. It's a trace element. Anytime you use the endocrine system, which is the immune and reproductive system, your workers in the endocrine system are hormones. The workhorse is an enzyme. When you have estrogen come out of the pituitary gland, it goes down to this heifer's ovary and said, "You're going to grow an egg now. You're time enough to reproduce." Who grows the egg? An enzyme. And what is an enzyme? I mean, that meal we just ate, there's probably 30,000 enzymes in your body digesting that along with the microbes in your gut. An enzyme is a little chunk of protein called an amino acid, and the second half of an enzyme is a trace element. If you fly on a plane and get exposed to a whole bunch of respiratory viruses, you better have some zinc, because zinc goes into the enzyme to help you fight off respiratory infections. And that zinc has got to come out of your muscles. And what happens when you eat extra selenium and extra cobalt? You store it in your striated muscles and that. And so you need that reserve. And iodine, even though those are poisons, and I'll get calls from this guy in the summer saying, what should I worm with? And I'll quiz him, "You've been on kelp?" "Yeah." "Take an OB sleeve and you go out after you let your cows out." And I said, grab of manure from 5 cow patties, take it to your vet clinic and do a parasite count. And call me before you buy $400 worth of wormer for your cows. I'll get a phone call and they'll say, "My vet clinic can't believe it. They found very, very few worm eggs." Now, parasites are known to be seasonal egg layers. They have no idea how they know that it's January, February. And you never want a cow to be without an internal parasite, because a small load is a symbiotic relationship. And when that small load of parasites is in there, that's a protein and that's an antigen, and cows will form immunity to that parasite. And you want a constant little challenge every so often of strongyles and worms in the intestine, and she has immunity. And even these calves that are on pasture following mama, when they're using the nanny cow system, when they're following mama around, they're picking up some parasites and they're developing immunity along with mama. And when they quit nursing, they're better able to withstand a challenge than a calf that's never had any exposure.
But so the calves that aren't on mama and they're being exposed to these parasites because they're on grass, they're going to have a problem fighting that off. But the kelp and what else? Kelp and
humates.
And humates, that will help them build up an immunity as well?
Humates doesn't, but kelp will.
Okay.
Kelp will. And this exposure, this little calf, that's good. This limited exposure, it's forming immunity. This calf that's been in a pen that's never seen any parasites, you turn him out, boy, he's going to crash. And they're going to, first thing, the weaning blues is, and I'm dealing with this all the time. Man, when I wean my calves, I've learned that we feed them more milk. I had 18 of the best looking calves. I kept them on milk 10 weeks. And I looked at them, they've been out in 5 weeks on pasture, and they are a sick bunch. That's coccidiosis. It's totally missed in the conventional world. They're starting to pick up on it from the sustainable world. But if you can control crypto and cocci at post-weaning, and the best way to control cocci is reed, sedge, peat, or humates. Parasites know. This guy that spoke from Louisiana State University was probably the authority in the U.S. on parasites. He said there's something that parasites pick up on when a cow's immune level drops off from a stress or something, they start laying eggs. These parasites know, hey, I got a vulnerable host here. Let's lay some eggs. And they've done studies where they've stressed these cows, and all of a sudden the eggs coming out of that cow are way up. It's like, how do those worms know? I mean, it's amazing what they've learned in parasitology. And so, backing up, rather than going into detail, my job at my age is to pass on my knowledge. And we're getting more and more people looking at the sustainable world. We got 3 kinds of dairy farmers out there right now. We got the guy that's sitting on the edge of his chair, usually with a highly capitalized structure to feed for 100 pounds of milk. He's waiting for the next technological innovation to come out of corporate America. Where's it coming and what's it going to cost me? There's a second group that are biological, and they kind of don't like what they're doing. I'm using too much this and I'm using too much of that, and this isn't the way it used to be. And they're the biological group, and they're the questioning group. And that, why do I need all these sprays? Why do I need all these chemicals? Why do I need all these drugs? And then there's your sustainable organic group. The biological group is dwindling. They're going out by attrition. The price of land has made it so if you're going to be a farmer, you either got to marry some land or inherit it. You can't go out. What's your land in Ohio? 10, 12,000 acres?
Oh, it's over 30 now.
Yeah.
There was 2 acres sold in just outside of Berlin for $52,000 an acre.
Yep. Every place I go, and in the last year I've probably been, between my business and Organic Valley, I've probably been on 40, 45, 50 farms around, and I'll always say, hey, what can I buy a farm here for? If I want to be your neighbor, what can I... And they'll say, well, the last place I was in Iowa, you know, the Mennonites started coming in there in 1992. 50 families came out of Pennsylvania into northern Iowa, Mennonites, and they were 2,500 to 2,800, 2,900 an acre. And then they had 100 families come out of the East Coast in 2002, and it was 45, 47, 4,800. In 2002, well, I was over there in 2018, and I put a meeting on, and I say, what can I buy land here for? And they'll say, 8,500 to 10, but the farm just sold for 13,000. And I always get this but. This guy, corn farmer, farms 3,000 acres. He just paid 18,000. Or I mean, it's just all... There's a book out called The World Land Grab. It's not just happening in Iowa, in Ohio, and in Arcadia, Wisconsin. Our side hills that you can't even walk on have got big deer in them. So my land, my tree farm, $5,000-$6,000 an acre for a piece of woods in Buffalo and Trempealeau County because Pope and Young and Boone and Crockett have a lot of deer from those 2 counties. So what are you going to pay for corn ground? I mean, land was cheap when I got there in 67. I bought my first farm, 150 acres, for $13,000. $3,000 down, $2,500 a year at 4% for 4 years. I'm testing cattle with a realtor in 1972. And he said, I got a 240-acre farm that the old Norwegian can't get $12,000 for. That's $50 an acre in 1972, and I came from southern Minnesota, where before I went to vet school, it was $400 or $500 an acre. I went out and bought it for $12,000. Planted some trees on it. My deal, I did it all on borrowed money. I didn't have any money. Borrowed every penny from the bank, paying good interest. Back in the 70s, it was getting up there. And my paradigm was 25% increase per year. And after 18 months, you could get capital gains. And so I turned them over. I had it 2.5 years, this farm, for $12,000. And an attorney calls me, and he wants it to buy it for hunting land. What do you want for that? And I said, $40,000. Boy, I stuck it to him. I took 12 and made it to 40. That farm's worth $1 million now, over. I shouldn't have sold it. But land is just, there aren't making, and there's so many people wanting to buy land now. that they keep saying they don't make any more. And so land may stop selling, but I don't see Africa is being bought up by China. We have outside investors. There's people that have no intent of ever farming. And these farms aren't for sale. There aren't 3 farms for sale in the 2 counties I live in. They get sold to the relatives, or it's passed on, or it's quietly bought from the old bachelor, from the neighbor that's helped him. And you can't buy much farmland in western Wisconsin. It's just not for sale.
That's how it is in my part of Ohio.
Yeah.
There's just, if a farm, every once in a while, an investor will buy a farm and then chop it up and sell it.
Yeah.
But for the most part, they're selling off lots to the kids. They're selling off. What's sad to see is you had a lot of 120 to 150 acre farms that the more conservative ones that don't have milkers, they've been selling off lots, for the kids. Now all of a sudden the church allowed the bulk tank, so now they can ship grade A milk. They've got 40 acres left.
Yeah.
Not enough to make a living farming anymore. It's really sad to see, but because of the price of land and because of the population, the only way a farm will stay a farm is if, like my brother Tim lucked into it, rented a farm, and the owner of the farm was so delighted to see what he was doing. It was a working dairy farm again, that he sold it to Tim at a price that a farmer can afford. That's the only way you're getting a farm in my area, is either family or somebody who is desperate to not let that farm get split up.
What I'm seeing, we have Dr. Paul's lab, I think 75 dealers now. Probably 55 to 60 of them are plain folks. And I'm seeing a huge increase in the Amish and the Mennonite communities. They are still stuck to the soil stewards. Their paradigm is agriculture or construction or the trades. It's happening all over the Midwest because our land is cheaper in Wisconsin and even in parts of Minnesota, in that we've had a huge increase in plain folks coming from the expensive land, and they're producing really good food. They get it. They get it. We love the plain folks as dealers. Number one, they still have great integrity. They don't need to go to a class of ethics. They have that from their religion. We have hardly any problems with accounts receivable. And when you work with them and you show them why this works, they'll almost walk on water for you if they believe you. And they are producing some really good quality food. You guys know that because you deal with them in Michigan and you're from them in Ohio. And that they have the connotation that the plain folks produce really good food. And I keep preaching to them. I say, guys, don't ever lose this. Don't ever lose this. And I'm predicting down in the next 20 years, these big capital invested high-tech farms are imploding. They can't support the debt. They're ruining our soil. We have more erosion on dead soil than we've ever had. We're inviting a dust bowl. And when you get back to animals on the soil, the microbes in the rumen are the same in the soil. You got bacteria, fungi, nematodes, viruses, algae. It's all in the rumen, and those bugs need to come out of the rumen and keep our soil microbial and dynamic, And
in our conversation with Gary Zimmer, he was a ruminant nutritionist and realized that you feed the soil exact the same as you feed the rumen.
The only thing different is that the soil's got earthworms and dung beetles and arthropods, but all of the rest of the fauna is the same. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting, and animal agriculture is needed for this soil.
And wasn't it John Kemp that said they did a study in the Midwest, the best corn ground, and if they bought stocker cattle in the spring, grazed those cattle, and sold them in the fall, was it John that said that? That it is more profitable than corn or beans. And that is bringing animals back to the land to continue, or to that, so you have that complete cycle.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is so wonderful about the small organic farms is with the livestock you get that whole complete circle.
It's circle
like,
of life.
Like Dad used to say, during the summer you work your tail off to fill the barn, and feed the cows. Then during the winter you work your tail off to haul it all back out on the field.
Yep.
But if you look, the only thing that isn't going back to the land is the milk. And if you look at all the milk you're hauling off your farm, you're hauling the calcium, you're hauling the stuff off, so that needs to be replaced. But you have that cycle, and I don't know, there's just something really rewarding about that.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
People that are, Teddy Roosevelt said, the further away you get from Mother Earth, the less common sense you have. And I often think about that. I went and sat in the Mall of America to do my domestic chores. I got a couple daughters in the cities, and so I'm an observer, and I'm watching these youth walk by, and they got all this metal sticking in their eyebrows and their lips, and they got these pants dragging way down in the ground, and they got purple hair, and I look and I think, you know what that guy needs? He needs 20 chickens and a garden. He needs to till the soil on his knees and talk to these chickens or pigs or whatever. He needs to get reconnected with Mother Earth.
A pitchfork in a box stall full of manure would probably be a good remedy too.
That'd be in second grade. It's amazing. I gave the keynote speech at the Sustainable Ag Conference in South Dakota a couple of years ago, a year ago. And I Googled, I can Google, I'm old, but I love Googling. And I said, what's the population of the United States? And it was 335 million. Where do they live? This blew me away. 80% of our population lives in a major city or a suburb. And you guys have traveled and I've traveled, and you get out on the East Coast, it's wall-to-wall people.
Mm-hmm.
These big cities are millions, and suburbs. What really scared me is it said these 80% are 5 generations away from agriculture. Now, I got 2 son-in-laws married to my daughters, 2 of my daughters, that are further than that. One's a research scientist doing stem cell research for Fujifilm, going back and forth to Japan. One of them's an electrical engineer that works for Rockwell International. They all make over 6 figures. They have no clue of where their food comes from. They have no clue. And this is scary. Our society, they don't know about soil erosion. They don't know the negatives of the sides, and Germany just passed a law, that in 2019 there will be no more GMO plants, and there will be no more glyphosate used in Germany sometime in 2019.
I heard that they're getting sued by Monsanto, and that just got thrown out.
Yeah, they won't. Germans are not going to listen.
Yeah. And I think when you talk about the disconnect between food, farming, and a lot of people, I think that's Brian and I's goal, is to try to use this platform to make people aware of what
we are putting so much in our food that it's scary. Mm-hmm. The young millennial is a whole new group. You're not going to fool them. You ask any 10-year-old kid in the streets of a city, what's the biggest dinosaur? They will have it in 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. And so we're dealing with a different crowd, these millennials. And that's my hope, that these people are the young, educated females, and I've got 3 daughters, they are going to change things. And when we can get these young, educated females into positions of power, whether it's in the USDA or in our Congress or in the pharmaceutical or in the FDA world, it's going to change, because I don't see these young girls as being bought. They're not for sale. They're not for sale. And our whole government and leadership has gotten to be the good old boy club. You take care of me, I'll take care of you. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but it's just not. We're doing a lot of things that aren't right. We lost our ethics. We lost our integrity, and it's all for the almighty dollar. And that's, mm-hmm. I hope that changes in a little bit. Mm-hmm. Back up to sustainable agriculture. When I go to put a meeting on for people that are coming into the window of the first look, I say there's 3 areas you concentrate on. Number 1, and the most important, is soils. Health starts you can't grow a healthy plant on unhealthy soil. When you get the Elbrecht system, which is 2 chemistry, William Elbrecht in Missouri in the 30s said, what do I need in the soil to grow a healthy plant? That was his premise. And the von Liebig theory of replacement doesn't work. When you take 40 pounds of potassium off in your hay, you don't need to put 40 pounds of potassium back when you already got too much potassium in the ground. And so Elbrecht went back to the soil has a negative charge. What are the positives that should stake on that negative soil, and in what proportion do you want them? And that's what he studied. And your calcium, magnesium, potassium, your little sodium, and a pH of 6.5 to 6.8. When you get these cations lined onto this negative soil, then you can start growing some food. I got into the soils when I called my good farmer, who was a soils man. I bought my first farm in 1970. I paid $13,000 for it. It was the end of a valley with a nice big spring. It had been farmed up and down the hills. It was eroded. It was clay soil in a driftless area. And I was a farm boy from Minnesota that did not have any trees in our whole area. It was prairie. And so I went to pre-vet with a bunch of foresters and palled around with the foresters, and I decided when I got out of practice I'm going to have a couple tree farms. So I bought this land, and there's 80 acres of 150 that was open, eroded grassy fields. I called the forester and I said I want to plant it to trees. And it was the first farm in western Wisconsin that had ever been put back into trees. It was all HEL land, highly erodible land. And the forester jumped at it. And so I put in 40,000 black walnut trees and 40,000 white pine trees in 3 years. I bought an Alice tractor and a tree planter and hired a guy, and we planted trees. I did not know that black walnut needed good soil. My bottom land, 12 years later, tree 7, 8 inches around, 23 feet high. Look at the squirrel up there. That's a nice walnut tree. And I get over on this rocky sandy knob, and this tree isn't even 4 feet high. It's been there 12 years. It's got 27 yellow leaves, and it grew this much last year. I'm a conventional vet, so I call my guy that's going organic, and this is like in 82. I planted these in 70, and I'm looking for the magic bullet to put on there. I'm conventional. And he says, you need a soil test. Oh, what are you doing Tuesday? I said, well, I'm going to be taking calls. He said, no, you're not. You're going to go with me. Where? You're going to go hear a speaker that talks about soils. His name was Gary Zimmer. And he was a good accountant, and I had been really working hard, and I thought, I suppose I can take a day off to get this guy off my back. So I rode down to southern Wisconsin with him, and Gary Zimmer would always pick a topic for the day, and he picked the topic, the evils of high potassium in your hay. And he started talking about when you get your calcium-potassium ratio, it should be close to 1 to 1, and when it's 1 to 6 or 1 to 8, and you don't need to put on 0060 potassium chloride because the potassium goes into the plant, makes it look green, hollow stem, and it's unbalanced. And the chloride hooks up with what calcium you don't have there and takes that down. And I'm driving home and I'm thinking, I got 2 farms that I can never get a milk fever up. Every milk fever was an alert downer. Next time I get on those farms, I say, what do you do with your hay fields? Oh, we put fertilizer on them from the co-op. Guys on the co-op board. What's your fertilizer? It's called 0060. Little light bulb came on. Little light bulb came out. Aha. And so I started making this connection with what's in the soil and what's in the plant. And I went for 15 years to those meetings. Agronomy makes a veterinarian better. You see the whole picture. Every veterinarian should have a class in agronomy and understand why this farm is screwed up, because it all starts in the soil. Mm-hmm. Second area, you got a 3-year transition to come into the sustainable world. Get your soil sample and start now. And it's fun to watch these things. When you start getting a little calcium on a calcium-starved soil, you'll see a response that first year or so. It's quite dramatic. I sold BioCal, which is calcium, fine calcium, sulfur and boron, and you could see where they spread it on this hayfield because it would be green, and if they didn't drive too far apart, then it could just, I had farmers call me and say, wow, look what this stuff did. It gets to be about 3 years and you kind of don't see it anymore, and that's when they want to quit doing it because they don't see the big kick they saw at first. But you got to convince them that it's the long term. It takes when a farmer takes over a Roundup Ready farm today in America, and they want to go organic, and they've got this soil all beat up with herbs with synthesized molecules. You should never eat a synthesized molecule and stay healthy. Think about that. Go back to the old paleo diet and eat nothing but what's grown with Mother Nature with nothing added, and you'll stay pretty healthy, being it's balanced now. But anyway, got to get back on my train. I'll tell him it's going to take you 5 to 8 years to turn this farm around with due diligence. And you're going to do it with humates, and you're going to do it with the cover crops, and you're going to do it with some calcium, and you're going to get the base saturation where it should be. And this became really evident when I was working with Organic Valley, putting on these barn meetings. I got all over the U.S. They were wonderful to me, and I saw and learned so much on their checkbook, and I did their farmers a lot of good, I think. And we'd go to an old timer that had been on the truck for 12, 13 years. And I'm in this barn with these new neighbors that are going to look at this program, and I'll say, John, what are you seeing? And he'd say, it's gotten so easy. Yeah, it's gotten so easy. I don't call you anymore. I don't hardly use any of your products anymore. It's just, remember we had all the trouble with the scours when I started? And remember we had this? He said, it's gotten so easy. And that's when you got a farm that's really working. And it takes a while.
And you see that with farmers coming to organics. They're new to this, so they are stocking up on every medicine they can find. And, like you said, 8 years down the road, 5 to 8 years down the road, you go into their medicine cabinet, there's 2 bottles there.
Yeah.
There's one called Dullet.
Yep.
And there's one called CEG.
Yep.
Those are the 2 that's pretty much it. And it's really exciting to see as their soils get better, the need for the Band-Aids goes away.
Absolutely.
And now, for Dr. Paul's lab's sake, that's not necessarily a great thing for your sales, but there's enough new coming in. And your products, what I think a lot of the products do is they help people so much until they're to that point. And some farms will never get to that point. Because it takes a conscious, concerted effort to get that farm to where it needs to be.
Organic agriculture is a systems approach. Mm-hmm. It's not cookie cutter. Think of this. Everybody in America pretty much plants the same corn, the same time, with the same type fertilizer and the same type sprays. And they harvest it in the fall when the moisture gets there. There's only one guy thinking. Now, I've been on a plethora of farms, and I'll drive out of some of these farms, whether it's an Englishman or a Mennonite or an Amish, and I'll drive out and think, man, is that ever neat what he's doing, that feeding system? Or, man, why didn't I think of that? When you get into the sustainable world, first off, that group is very sharing, but they're thinkers. Mm-hmm. They're thinkers, and when they tell you something, you listen. I've learned more from my farmers than I did any book in college. When a guy says, if you have a goat in your pen, you don't have ringworm. First time I heard that, I rolled my eyes. A goat in a pen gets rid of ringworm.
Ours was called William. We had a little billy goat run with the cows. Foot rot and ringworm.
I go to Holland, and every pen has got a branch of holly, Holly. It's in my new book. I took pictures. You will see in ringworm, how do you prevent ringworm? A goat or holly. That's personal observation. And I don't need the data on it. I know it works. I've had farmer after farmer roll their eyes at me at our school and say, oh, where did Dettloff come up with this? And come back and 3 years later, and they're hugging me and saying, that works. I can't believe I got a goat, and the goat died, and in 4 months I had ringworm. I went and bought another goat, and the ringworm disappeared. What is it about the goat?
Well, that's where the term scapegoat comes from originally, or that's what Dad told me, that the term scapegoat comes from a goat because it will draw it away from cows, but it won't affect the goat.
Yeah. It's all got to do with frequencies. Everything is frequency. That electron going around the proton and neutron, if it goes counterclockwise, it's positive. If it goes clockwise, it's negative. And the negative's got 1/3 the energy. And it's just, we're getting into quantum physics, and that's the tip of the iceberg. It's the tip of the iceberg. When we learn about quantum physics, we're going to really get smart in agriculture. But the soils, and then feed the diet, the rumen. We have a travesty going on in the big CAFOs and that. They're all feeding mega corn silage. And they're all feeding their dry cows now corn silage. I'm involved in the banking world, and I work with 5 little country banks that have some fairly big FSA loans, and a lot of them are in trouble right now. And I'll go into those herds when they're crashing, and they're feeding 45 pounds of corn silage to their dry cows. And you test corn silage, and what's in it? 0.1% calcium, 0.1% calcium, hardly any phosphorus. These cows are freshening completely demineralized. The young heifers now are having uterine torsions because they don't have enough calcium and magnesium in their system, and so their muscles don't have any tone. When I started practice in 67, I would see 1, maybe 2 uterine torsions a year. And it's 180 degrees counterclockwise. And you reach in, and at 9 o'clock there's a shelf, and you can feel that calf laying on his back. You can tickle his nose and his feet, and you put your finger in his nose or eye, and he's alive. And she stands there with her tail out, and she'll die before she ever has it. When I left practice, in 35 years later, 1/3 of my calvings were torsion. And every time I get a new torsion on a farm, I'd say, Brian, have you ever had a torsion? No. You're going to see more. Look at her. First thing you see, her tail's out, her vulva is sucked in. That twisting of that uterus has pulled the vulva in. Instead of being a nice fleshy vulva, it'd be a little slit of a vulva, puckered in. You run your hand in, and it's tight, and you go over at 9 o'clock, and here's this rim, and you feel that calf. And I would say reach in. So if you get another one standing with their tail out, don't watch her for 2 days. Reach in and see what you got. I would train them to recognize a torsion. Torsions are very, very, very common in your CAFOs now because they're feeding all this corn silage, and there's no minerals in corn silage. You don't test grain for minerals. That's energy. You test your forages. We got to get back to feeding that rumen right, and the rumen is made for grass. The soils, the diet, the vet tools. The vet tools, the more money you spend over here, for every $2 you spend on kelp to help that immune system, you're going to save, for every $1 you spend, you're going to save 2 on vet tools. Personal observation. I have never seen anything, and I get approached by buku people that want me to condone something, to sell something. these are new people to the industry that want to jump on our bandwagon. And they probably don't even know how to spell organic. And I say, I've never seen anything that does as much good for the least amount of money as kelp. And I don't sell it. It's in my aloe vera pellets to support the immune system and that. But it's just a whole system approach. And I tell these people, crawl in and work with Mother Nature, study your ecosystem and work with her. Mother Nature, you can only bend so far, and she's always going to bat last. So, I've done all the talking. You have questions?
No, we just really, really appreciate the stories and the personal observations, because like you said, we may not know all the scientific things that are happening by the way that the changes that we're seeing when people go to the systems approach that organic agriculture has. We may not know all the things that are happening, and I don't think we need to. And we need to be comfortable. We don't have to, and we need to be comfortable not knowing all that stuff. It just works. And like you said, personal observation, and I like a quote you usually say is, personal observation is the best source of information.
Most reliable source of truth.
Yep.
The other thing that's rewarding is that people that come to us to change because they're not making money, or the peer pressure, or they aren't totally convinced, but their wife wants them to do it or whatever, but they will philosophically change. And evidence of this is that I had a valley west of town where there were 4 farmers up this valley, all good, conventional little farmers, that either had a change of guard where John was young, coming home, or this and that, and these were all had transitioned to organic or were in it and were convinced of it, and there's one guy sitting in the middle. And pretty conventional. Went through a divorce, remarried a gal that was earthy, and she kind of pressured him, I'm not marrying you basically unless you go organic like your neighbors type thing. And
that'll either make or break the deal.
And that's unusual. And this guy was Joe conventional. And so I'm in my very autumn, and my hip is really, really hurting me. I left practice. I practiced 2 years too long with a bad hip. I lived on homeopathy, the little jar. It's called hypericum, and that is St. John's wort. It's a homeopathy. The frequency is from St. John's wort that kills pain. And I would pregnancy check 50 cows on a lockup every Wednesday morning, 50, 60, 80 on my big 500, 400 cow herd. And that's all I do. Group 1 means be there at 6 o'clock, and I'll have 80 cows ready for you. And I'd go there and I'd pregnancy check 80 cows, pushing off my right hip because I used my left hand, and boy, I was a hurting machine. I could hardly get in the truck. My wife had been telling me, you better get your hip fixed. You better get your hip fixed. And I was vain German, and these little homeopathy pills would kill the pain in 2 miles. So this guy calls. He said, I got a cow down in the dry lot with milk fever. It was like 5:30. And I said, okay. He said, and she's pretty low. I said, I'll be there, right? I'll get up and go right now. So he's got a barn here, and he's got a new little parlor, swing parlor. And you go around this barn, and here's this 2-acre dry lot where he'd have his dry cows. And he had a gator. And I would treat maybe 3 milk fevers a year there, about 80 cow herd, 340 milk fevers. And so I get there, and the sun's just coming up, and he's just kind of coming out of the milk house. And it had rained about a half inch the night before. Nice, gentle rain in the spring. And I go in the milk house, and I get my disinfectant and water, and I'm heading with my grip over to his gator, his John Deere gator, sitting there. And he said, what if I carry your pail and your grip? Can you walk back there with me? Yeah, I can. Okay. I said, what's the gator broke down? No, gator didn't broke down. But he said, I went out and looked at that cow this morning, and he said, my road is covered with night crawlers. And he said, God, I hated to run over them. And he said, they're still out there. He said, can we go out there without killing my night crawlers? And I thought, yep, I'll walk out there. I thought, man, you didn't even know how you philosophically changed.
Mm-hmm.
He's now worried about his night crawlers. Mm-hmm. That makes it all worth it for me.
Yeah.
Huh? Mm-hmm. And it would happen in about 3 years after you quit poisoning all those things in the field. I would be out vaccinating calves, dehorning calves, and this guy all of a sudden gets this epiphany. Oh, Doc, guess what I got on my farm? And I mean, he's so excited. I thought maybe a condor flew over or something. This has to be great. I got earthworms. I got earthworms back. He said, where do those earthworms come from out in the middle of my field? They were gone. I said, Mother Nature is so divine if we just get out of her way. Mm-hmm. Where do dung beetles come from? They just appear if you are good enough to Mother Nature and you treat the soil right. And yeah, it's just kind of rewarding to see how the sustainable world is changing people's attitudes and their whole lives, and they think different about their kids and everything.
I think a lot of that happens subconsciously. They might come for the money or whatever you might say, but they come for the financial side.
Yes.
But the other side happens without them realizing, and me as an outsider talking to them 3-4 years later, I can see it, and they don't even realize that they've actually bought into the system and are now excited about what they're doing and really believe in it.
Because it's working.
Because it's working.
Because it's working, and they've, like you said, they've gotten out of Mother Nature's way, and now rather than fighting her tooth and nail with poisons and drugs and everything, now we're back in this symbiotic relationship, and everybody gets better. It's the cows, the humans, the soil, the
food, the whole ecosystem is better. Mm-hmm. We're not hurting our aquifers. We got to stop this soil erosion in America, though. The societies. If you look, I read history all the time. Greenland. When the Vikings brought sheep to Greenland and denuded it, they lost their soil. When Easter Island cut all their trees down, that great society with those huge stone figures, we don't even know how they made them. When they cut all the trees off, they lost their society. When the Mayans, there's fragile soil in the Yucatan Peninsula, it's all limestone with a little bit of soil, and when they lost their soil, they lost their society. When you lose your soil, you lose your culture. And we have soil erosion in the Midwest on these highly erodible lands. There should be no way that the Department of Ag will give a farmer in the program when he puts highly erodible land into a row crop. That is a travesty, and there's somebody not thinking. And in my 2 counties, we are flushing right down the Mississippi River. Our little creeks run brown. And it's terrible. It just hurts me to see this side. I had a guy from Britain come over and ride with me for 5 days. That was when I was collecting cream separators and dairy stuff, and we had this convention. And he got taken out by foot and mouth. He was within a 10-mile circle of foot and mouth where they slaughtered all the animals. He had a 200-cow herd. 50 of them were white shorthorns, and he was selling breeding stock. Foot and mouth came in. They killed the animals and burnt them and buried them on his farm, and they couldn't repopulate for 5 years. He came over here, and we no-till. If you can drive a tractor in Trumpeau and Buffalo County without it tipping over, we put it into no-till with Roundup. And when you kill all that debris, and I go hunt arrowheads in the back end of these valleys, wherever there's a spring, that was a Native American campsite on this highly erodible land around the spring. And you'll have this trash from the corn stalks on top, and we get these 2, 3, 4 inch rains. There'll be a gully this deep and this wide. That huge amount of dirt is left. You'll sprain your ankle if you step in there. And I'm looking on this little sandy knoll where the Indians camped 12,000, 10,000 years ago, and I'm seeing in 1 year we lost 10,000 years of soil from all these rains, and we don't see it. Mm-hmm. And our USDA they're doing a horrible job at protecting our soil in the United States. It's a travesty what's happening. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. My optimistic point is Voltaire, the French philosopher, said, what's right will prevail. And guys, what we're doing in sustainable agriculture is just so right. I don't need to sit in a tavern or do this. I go to bed at night with peace of mind, knowing that I'm helping humanity a little bit, an acre at a time, a cow at a time, a farmer at a time, and that's all we can all do. Mm-hmm. And you guys are doing the same thing, but I mean, it's you kind of know you're being thanked by Mother Nature for what you're doing, you know.
Mm-hmm. It's rewarding.
Yeah, it's rewarding.
And there's times when we talked earlier today how if you look on the negative side of what's happening, you know, with the erosion and stuff, it can be overwhelming. But when you look at the positive things that are happening, it's really exciting.
It's really exciting.
And it keeps you going.
And it keeps you going. And the negatives don't tend to come to sustainable agriculture. Your people that we deal with day in and day out are really a positive group. Mm-hmm. And I enjoy that. Mm-hmm. Negativism tends to thrive on negativism. And the positive, just ignore it and move on. And then, I mean, it's light at the end of the tunnel.
I think that's a great place to wrap up on a nice positive note. And Dr. Paul, we really, really appreciate your time and the stories and everything. And yeah.
Do you want to tell people a little bit where they can buy Dr. Paul products and what you've got going on there?
I backed into, because I've got an inquisitive mind and I read, I started developing tools, tinctures, botanicals, working with Mother Nature. We work with all the major certifiers. My wife is the rock of the company, and we have 5 part-time employees. We're a cottage industry. We built a new house and we put a lab in it, and so we make all of our products except for the essential oils, and I was failing at making them because I'm an OCD type 1 male. I handed them off to a neighbor girl, Dr. Sarah Slobby, and here's a gal with moxie. She came from a large, poor family. I don't think that girl had shoes more than 1 pair every 3 years. They were homeschooled. They kind of were raised on folk medicine, large family. She got into La Crosse State University, got a degree in biology, got into Madison Veterinary School, and while she was there, she would call me and say, what are you doing Friday after Thanksgiving? And I'd say, well, I'm working. And when she was 13, she would go over to a sale barn about 8 miles from her and buy this calf that nobody wanted because it was scouring for $1. And this other one with a bad leg, and this other one with a navel infection, and she'd bring these calves home and mother them. And when she'd get about 8 of them or so, she'd call, and I'd make a vet call there. And here's this gal with some moxie trying to save these calves, and I would say, well, you need this. I was conventional. And I ended up giving her more drugs, and I lost money on every call I went there. When she gets out of vet school, she goes to work at a big $1 million clinic at Winona, Minnesota. And about that time, I'm done practicing with my hip is taking me out and my shoulder isn't good. She married a local boy from Arcadia who has an organic dairy farm. It wasn't organic. And she kind of absorbed my clients. I didn't sell my practice or shut it down because I had a lot of people coming from miles around to buy my organic products, and I'd set up a distributorship and stuff. Anyway, she was there one day saying, man, this is neat. What can I do? And I said, you can make essential oils. I got a 800-page book on the chemistry of essential oils made simple by Dr. David Stewart.
Can't be making it too simple if it took him 800 pages to do
yeah,
it, right?
And it was, boy, but he was a philosopher. You don't use anything synthesized. And anybody that's going to take organic chemistry needs to read this. I read the book, and I gave it to Sarah, and I said, back up, because I can't make a salve. I know what I want in this salve. I know what I want in this fly spray. And so I gave this all to her, and it took a woman. And she came back, and so Dr. Sarah's Essentials, we market her products, and she's dyslexic. She thinks different. She's brilliant. And she will be an icon in the organics down Life's Highway. And so anyway, that's where the essential oils came from. So I'm deep into my autumn now, and we have 6 children. Our youngest is an acupuncturist. She's early 30s. She's got a degree in master's in Chinese herbology, and she went through the University of Wisconsin. She was valedictorian, and she is in the process of we're transitioning to her. The business will be moved down to Mazomanie by Madison. She has purchased a facility that's got a big new warehouse. She's going to take Dr. Paul's to a whole new level. Her husband's a research scientist, a microbiologist, and he's working for Fuji Films. That's a world leader in stem cell research. He can take a white blood cell from your arm, and depending on what he feeds it, he can turn it into a heart cell. He has grown a nerve cell. He's grown a myelin sheath. Stem cell research is a whole new field that no longer needs cadavers or anything. They're way beyond that. But so she's going to be our succession. We operate out of Arcadia, Wisconsin, and we do through dealers. We have, I think, 75 dealers in the U.S. The plain folks in Ohio and Indiana, when they need this stuff, they need it now. If they got a cow with huge udder edema, instead of calling Arcadia and we shipping it 4 days, this is Friday, so you won't get it till Monday, so next Thursday you'll get it. I'm sorry, that cow's dead or better. So our structure was to set up dealers. We make a little less profit. We let the Amish and the Mennonites, they're very, very culturally knit together, and so we love working with the plain folks. We do have English. We do have these organic, non-GMO feed mills now that are coming to us. And so our distribution is many, many faceted. We will sell direct, and but Dr. Paul's has been growing as the industry has. We're learning stuff all the time. We've taken the high road with the certifiers if it can be sourced organic or the best quality products we can find. But I formulate and we make everything except the essential oils, which Dr. Sarah does. So there will be succession, which farmers have to worry about succession. We do also. And so it's Dr. Paul's Lab. We're on the web. We can't say anything about our products because we're making claims, but we give a list of them, and our dealers have lots of educational aids. So
I'm actually, it's drpaulslab.net.
Correct.
On the website. So thank you. This was a very, very enjoyable time to sit here. We really appreciate everything you've done.
Yes, well, I appreciate. It's always amazing the brilliant young people that come into this sustainable world. I'm constantly telling my wife about this new guy I met, and man, is this guy sharp. He knows about this, or he knows. But the sustainable world attracts neat minds, guys that are free thinkers, guys with an open mind.
Well, curiosity, I think, is the biggest thing.
It's just, and I didn't finish my story. When you jump out of the box, they laugh at you. The second thing they do is they condemn you. He won't quit. What's wrong with him? And when it's successful, the third thing is they all want to jump on the bandwagon. And I'm running the bandwagon right now. I got people coming. It's just fun to be a part of this and see the evolution that I've in my business and the whole industry has gone through. I mean, if you're a little farmer in Wisconsin, a dairy farmer, and you're not organic, what's the matter with you? You're going to sell out probably, or you got a health problem. I mean, if you've got 40 cows in Wisconsin and you're not organic, something's wrong with you. It's no longer a joke.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it, and I consider you guys disciples to carry on when I'm gone, and so go to it.
We will do our best. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.